Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Return of the Archon. It is I, Tom, the very lowest of men, and I'm here again for my running series on my return to playing Drukhari competitively with the Sky Splinter Assault Detachment. This is part 4. I'm talking about a run I had at Hertfordshire GT, one of my favourite local events to me in my local area, run by the Toys of Mass Destruction crew. It is a wonderful event. I had a really, really good time with this one, and got a bunch more good testing games in with the Drukhari and continued learning important lessons about how to get the best out of Drukhari and out of Sky Splinter Assault. So you'll be familiar with the series at this stage. It's going to go through the different matchups. It's going to talk about the list. It's going to talk about key learnings. As ever, please do hit like and subscribe. Please do leave us a comment. Your support helps us to get further, reach more people, and continue making excellent content for you all. So do that. And if you are interested in supporting us more seriously, you can consider becoming a YouTube member as well. Thank you very much to everyone who's already supported us so far. So I'm going to go straight into the sort of event expectations because I think you guys understand the structure fairly well at this point. If we're thinking about what my goals were going into this event, I have played at Hearts GT a couple of times. They have their own unique terrain setup, which is a riff on UKTC that also involves adding some blocks of crates on the board, which makes some moves with blocking and staging a little bit more possible. It's a little bit less shooting friendly than just pure UKTC, but still quite shooting friendly. And then crucially, Hearts GT is a fun but competitive environment. You always get 6 or 7 of the sort of top UK sort of players turning up, but also there's a bunch of people who are there to have a good time as well. So what I've found in these events is that if I'm running something that's strong that I know well, then I can place very high. So I'd had a podium with the Votan at the previous Hearts GT I'd been to. And I think going into this one, my feeling was that if I could just get a bit of luck with the matchups and the timings, then replicating that and achieving another podium was very possible. So I had set myself a team goal of trying to get a few more GT podiums this year. And having already got one, I was keen to try and get a second, getting a bit greedy now, because that then makes my life easier with ticking off my goals towards the end of the year, means I can have some fun. So I was also very keen to keep consolidating my Drukhari playstyle and matchup knowledge. There are still a few question marks over the lists I've been running in terms of the balance and the composition, so I wanted to just see whether that continued to raise questions for me in this event. But I think, as ever with an event like this, you have to be very relaxed and recognise that what missions you hit particular armies on are very key. If you hit something like Custodians on Purge the Foe with Drukhari, that's really rough. There was a very good Eldari player in attendance, Chris Patterson, so I know that that's a rough matchup for Drukhari as well. So just the timing and the sequencing means it's always very possible for you to have a difficult run and not quite achieve what you would like to. And I was always, very relaxed and open about that at the start as well. So as far as the list goes, this is still that this list has been doing great for me over 2 previous events, so I didn't want to change it too much. This is still the Knifey Spoony special. So this is a very Incubi heavy take on Sky Splinter Assault with a 10-man and 2 5-mans, then Witches and Cabalites, a couple of Mandrake squads, some Reavers for quick OC, 2 Dark Lance Scourge squads, 1 Haywire Scourge squad, a Kronos, a Ravager with Dark Lances, 2 Raiders, and 3 Venoms. I've got triple Archon, Lilith, and a Beastmaster. And what I was finding very consistently was that the balance of tools here was good. I liked having the range of tools that I have. I liked being able to use the very juiced up Incubi damage several times in a game. And I think I had a nice mix between shooting, utility, and output here. And I was finding it was very capable of sort of quite decisively putting an opponent away if I was able to connect with these tools at the right time in games. My round 1 game was into Graham running Orcs. Now, Orcs are an interesting one for Drukhari. I think we have a lot of the good weapons to deal with Orcs. And Graham's list was a very stagey melee list. So he had a battle wagon, he had some trucks, he had Gaz, he had Knobs, he also had Mega Knobs, he had some Beast Snaggers, and he had some Bikers. And it was very much built to pressure, to rush into the middle and have a scrap. And Graham in this game took fixed secondaries. He went for Assassinate because I had 5 characters, and he also went for Homers because he had lots of nice little units to go and do that with as well. He also had Grots in trucks, it's worth saying. Grots in trucks are very annoying, actually, for their price in points. The mission was take and hold, so big, generous, hold 1, hold 2, hold 3 primary. And we were on Dawn of War, which means that it's a very big ruckus in the middle, everything running straight directly at each other across the long board edge. And I got the first turn, which I think in this game probably helps me quite a lot because it means I can set the tempo and I can get into the Orcs and start making problems for them before they can. So for a game plan here, I went with proactive disruptive, right? The primary was very generous. But if you're on first turn, your opponent is always likely to get a good endgame swing, which means I have to deny primary very aggressively for several turns, and I have to try and carve out primary for myself. And so that means proactive, disruptive approach here. And as ever with Drukhari, I think the key thing for this was that I was going to need to be sending some stuff to die in the way of Graham's units, pushing him back, holding up a flank, and trying to carve out space on the sides because he had Gazgul ready to roll down the middle. And so to this effect, I ran the beast pack up, and it just rushed up and stood in front of a bunch of trucks on one flank so that the trucks couldn't get moving, couldn't get rolling down to that side, which meant I was able to hold that side very easily with some Reavers that had rushed out as well. And I staged Cabalites and Lilith on the other side as well, giving Graham an issue of without his sort of good guns available, actually demeching me and catching me when I've got my runaway strat with the vehicles is quite difficult. So over the sort of middle of the game, Graham came and started engaging me. I was able to keep blocking him, keep throwing away chaff to prevent things like the trucks from getting to the objectives too early. And the crates on the Toys of Mass Destruction terrain definitely helped a little bit with this as well, made it a little bit harder for Graham to maneuver. I was able to play keep away with the characters for most of the game, which meant he only killed a few of them towards the end and didn't get a max on the 20 for Assassinate. And I was also able to prevent him for quite a while from getting into my backfield for homers, which meant that on the secondaries, Graham had dropped a lot of points, which, given that Drukhari with the mandrakes and all the chaff and utility you can throw away are scoring secondaries really well, meant that I was building up a very good secondary lead. And I was also able to, in the sort of back and forth and conflict over the middle and the flanks, keep dropping valuable OC and enough bodies with the incubi onto points as he was trying to deal with the transports to keep sort of springing surprise swings on the primary, whilst also tying him up and blocking him in. In the late game, there's some fun moments where Scourge fly out, shoot, use their fire and fade to just stand in front of units like Meganobs that are quite slow, which effectively at that stage means they then can't get round to go and threaten my back objective. And I do break through behind Graham with a rapid ingress Incubi Venom, one of my favourites, to steal in and take his backfield objective once he's just as he's starting to actually really lock down the midboard. I think I controlled this game fairly well. I get tabled brutally, and it's a very violent and fun game, but I keep the Orcs where I want them for long enough that the points in particular swing my way, and that makes it a comfortable 92-73 win to the Drukhari, despite more or less being tabled by the end of the game. My favourite. In round 2, I was drawn into Sam on his 1,000 Suns. Now, I know Sam from sort of local area to me. Sam's a decent player and he's a nice guy. And Sam's list had Magnus, a Mutalith Vortex Beast, a bunch of rubrics with characters, and a Rhino. So it's fairly standard 1,000 Suns stuff. And I've played 1,000 Suns a bit myself, and I've played them into Drukhari a fair bit. And I know that 1,000 Suns can do quite considerable damage to the Drukhari. They have a lot of tools to really hurt MSU Eldar. They can chase after you. They can get horrible angles on you. Magnus is really difficult to kill. And in this instance, we had a mission which also made it very peaky, which was Purge the Foe. This is where you want kill more and hold more. And on the mission that we had, I think it was Crucible of Battle, so 5 objectives with diagonals. Actually holding more was never going to be particularly likely whilst we both had assets, but the kill more was going to be a big determinant of the game. But also in terms of the game plan, the issue is always dealing with Magnus. Drukhari, because of the Dark Lances, do create a problem for Magnus. He has to be very careful. He doesn't want to immediately rush forward because he can take a lot of damage if he starts failing 4-up saves. But at the same time, Magnus also just deletes any Drukhari unit that he looks at. So in this game, the 1,000 Suns got first 10. And I sort of staged up with the Beast Pack and then had to play very aggressively. And there's several reasons for this. I think the first is that I was always going to need to match whatever Sam was achieving with his kills and then start out killing him. Because with second turn in Purge, that's a bit of an advantage for me, but I do have to be able to get into a position to get the kills. And if I'm too far away, I can't connect and can't do damage to the sort of characters and other things. So I played this extremely aggressively. That means throwing a lot of stuff forward. I loaded up Sam's sort of safer objective with 1 Incubi Venom and 1 Cabalite Venom, very much in you have to commit resources onto this to stop me holding it and to deal with me. And I also used the Beast Pack to launch out from the middle and block off another flank, again, where there was some crates, which aided in the blocking, to prevent Sam's forces from coming through towards my safe objective. So in controlling the shape of the game, I pretty much had the Thousand Suns pinned where I wanted them. They were fighting over their own sort of staging objective. They weren't able to push out and attack mine. And that in turn meant that Magnus and the Vortex Beast had to swing onto that flank, the flank that should have been Sam's earlier in the game, and start fighting over that. And the big moment in this game is essentially that I make a couple of errors in my pain token management. I have a turn where I can get at Magnus, and the 10 Incubi brick comes out to charge Magnus, and I launch a lot of Dark Lances on Magnus. Now, this game was bonkers in terms of saves and damage. It's worth saying me and Sam both had crazy hot and cold luck at different times in the game, and we were both having a massive laugh with this, and Sam was an absolute gent about it and the swings in the game, so I was having a lot of fun with this. But I set myself up for failure here because I fired a bunch of Dark Lances at Magnus, didn't do enough, did a chip of damage, but not realistically enough. And then the 10 Incubi brick went into Magnus, and I realised at this stage I had not left enough pain tokens to empower the 10 Incubi brick. This is really bad. Don't do that, guys. Keep track very carefully of what you're going to need in the fight phase, and do not overspend in the shooting phase when you're getting carried away trying to juice up your Dark Lances. In the end, I was bailed out because a battle shock test was failed due to the Incubi's tormentors, which suddenly meant I could juice up the 10-man. Even with that, because Magnus has -1 damage, it came down to the last 1 or 2 saves as to whether that brick was going to manage to kill him. Even having dropped Magnus, because I was taking serious damage from chip mortals from the Vortex Beast, I can't remember if Magnus exploded, he might have done. I was also having a lot of casualties on that front, but Sam had reached a point where most of my Incubi were committed down that flank, and he opted at one point to stay in combat with the remains of a unit were fighting Incubi, the hope being he could Doombolt his way out and then charge into a different unit. And Sam rolls a 1 on his Doombolt, which is, again, huge. Very unlucky and very big on that flank. And that ultimately causes Sam's safe flank to collapse. And then I make a play in the later game to push through with an Incubi Venom and take his backfield as well. But I think this one was razor tight and very peaky, and there were several important moments in the game where the luck swung my way. But this is not a matchup I like for Drukhari at all. I think it's extremely dangerous, and I think Thousand Suns have all the tools to demech and body Drukhari very happily. If you can get Magnus down early, it helps, but I think it's very plausible to lose this game, and I think in this particular one, I had the better of the luck in the key moments. So, well played, Sam. Really good game, really interesting matchup, and the Drukhari took that 175 in the end. Round 3, end of the day, I'm drawn into one of the boogeymen of the meta. It is the Custodes, piloted by Andrew, and Andrew is a really lovely lad, and he's not that tournament experienced, but he is 2-0 at this point, which tells you something about the current state of Custodes. He's got a bunch of Custodian infantry bricks, as you might expect. He's got guard bricks, he's got a warden brick, he's got a big Alaris brick, which is a bit different, Trajan, some blade champs. I think Inquisitor Draxus is in there with the little artillery gun and re-rolling wounds, and supporting chaff. And the mission is Scorched Earth, and the mission also puts me on the first turn. This is not ideal in some ways, but it is good in others. And I pull this out by basically adopting one of the key strategies I think an elf army in general has to apply when dealing with a particularly tough or durable primary winning army. And another is just one of the sneaky things you can do to Custodes at the moment when you go first, right? So in general, when I play these kinds of durability armies, it's the same with sort of your Deathwing Terminator builds of yesteryear. You kind of have to play a sort of vortex approach, which is that you're very much swirling around the edge of the map, looking for an in, picking at the flanks, hitting them at the sides from a distance, forcing them to stretch and reach out to the sides from the objectives they're on if they want to actually counter you and hit you, and also trying to block them and prevent them from breaking through to your back objective. At the same time, you're looking to get an in and break through and push and take their sort of softer parts and get onto the back objectives. But as you gradually isolate and wear down the bricks, your chances of killing 1 or 2 of them get much higher. And once you reach a point where there's only 1 or 2 custodian bricks left, you can then go all in with all your remaining units, bundle them, try and tag up and trap and tie up as much stuff as you possibly can to stop them from doing things, scoring the cards and scoring the primary towards the end of the game. This is aided even more by the fact that in round 1 going first, Rob and I in our practice and our sort of discussions around Custodes had identified that if you have a raider on the line and they have a brick on the line, you can move, use the disembark strat, and get one of your heavy hitters into a Custodes brick turn 1 when they don't have enough CP to use -1 damage, to use fight first. They're not on an objective, so they can't even pop fight first if they wanted to. And in this case, that meant I could get into one of the guard bricks, which doesn't have a feel no pain it can pop, with 10 incubi at the start, delete the guard brick, which makes Andrew's game much harder because he's down one of his assets and he doesn't have many to begin with. It also starts a fight just outside his home deployment, which means he has to start getting resources out to deal with that. And it generally causes a lot of mayhem and stops him from pushing out onto the objectives with the whole army, which is obviously what he wants to do. Now, I'm in control of this game very happily for a while, and I am able to sneak in again and steal the back objective off some Sisters of Silence, but I make a couple of errors, and I think the key one is that I decide to leave Andrew with a very difficult charge towards my home objective with some Alaris that have just come in, rather than simply blocking them, throwing something in front of it and losing an asset but stopping them from getting towards my home objective for a turn. I go for, well, if he makes the 11, he makes the 11. I'm going to try and bait him out of here. Andrew does make the 11 because he's a damn hero, which then means I've got Alaris on my back objective a turn earlier than I would have liked. And that means in this game that we're actually both able to burn each other's back objectives. Now, I was fairly happy I'd played it well enough to prevent Andrew from doing this, but actually in the end, I didn't quite get it right. And I was a little bit, I sort of played the odds and didn't get that right, which makes this closer and peakier in the end than I wanted it to be. But because we've both gone for tactical objectives, and because I have swirled around the edges, picking off everything that isn't a sort of primary brick to start off with, Andrew's run out of assets to score his cards with and doesn't quite get enough on the secondaries and is a little bit behind on primary, which in the end makes this a 93-76 Custodes win. This is still a really rough matchup for Drukhari, but I actually think what I'm finding is the all-in infantry bricks invite a little bit too much pressure from you because they just don't have ways to hurt your transports consistently. They don't have enough ways to reach out and touch you, which actually means you can play a lot freer. You can have, Ravagers and Raiders just in the open firing Dark Lances all game. It's much easier for you to just focus down chunks of the army, and the repercussions if you stay at a safe distance are much less. Going into day 2, I was drawn against Tau. Now, this was played by the lovely Tom Redgate, who I'd not met before, but who was a really nice chap and very good player. And we were on Vital Ground. And this is a very tough, grindy mission where there's a lot more primary for breaking through to your opponent's backfield or for the middle. And Tom was running a couple of Devilfish, a Crisis brick, the Delete Everything Carry On Crisis brick, some Breaches, some Pathfinders. I think he had Dark Strider in there. There was a Riptide, Ghost Keel, some Broadsides. So quite a mixed arms tower list and some Kroot in terms of having a little bit of everything, but a lot of utility and a lot of punch in there. And I think in this game, the killer things were that I was on first turn, which in Vital Ground means with the way the board was set up, the defense on the middle objectives wasn't quite good enough, I would say. I think it was very difficult for anything to stand on the mid board without getting shot. This is actually something they got in feedback afterwards, and I think they're going to be adjusting in the future. But it meant that holding primary in the middle was going to be quite an ask. So I needed to project threat very aggressively. I think Tom was very wary of the Drukhari, and this is perhaps a little bit of an experience thing where I think he needed to disrespect my output and my offense and my durability and push up much more aggressively with as much of the army as he could. He dropped various things in as reserves. He had a bunch of solo commanders that came in as reserves. And I think actually pushing all of that up en masse early on and just overwhelming me and really blasting through to my objectives was probably the plan. But he was a lot more gradual in his approach, which in turn meant I could push up and stage up and try and make sure he was dealing with stuff I was throwing at him in his half rather than the other way around. And there was a couple of nice angles here where I was able to sort of skitter out with a Venom with some Cabalites in around the flank turn 1 and get an angle into some Breaches. Tom was doing some weird like Russian doll stuff with stuff coming out of Breaches, like recycling troops onto the point. I think that was the plan. But because the Cabalites got into the Breaches and did a number on them with their shooting, he'd lost one of the assets he was planning to cycle this with. So that gave me an in. I think Tom in general did a really good job of stopping things like the Scourge ever shooting much that mattered. And we had a really fraught back and forth over his sort of safer objective, which had Ornvar on it, who I eventually killed with a grenade. Mwah, you love that. And that basically I threw away stuff and got very, very, very brutalized for the cause over several turns. But what happened was that I'd been able to lock in and sticky my safer objective for a turn with some Cabalites, which was crucial because as he dealt with the other stuff, those Cabalites held that mid-board for a few turns, and then I was able to, with my remaining resources, just get in the way of where things like the Crisis Brick could stand, stop it from easily fire and fading and navigating through to that objective and taking it. And then all my remaining little assets, things like the Ravager, just ran up towards the end and just ran in to tie up and gum up the units that were trying to come up to take my objectives for the endgame swing. So I was able to prevent a serious endgame swing, which meant this finished 68-53 to the Tau. 68-53 to the Drukhari. Very tight, very difficult game. And I'd be really interested to see it played again, with Tom having the full knowledge of how that matchup plays. But it would also be interesting to see how it would have been if I was on endgame as well, whether there's anything in that. Next up, we have the final. So I was playing for all the marbles at this point in the final, and I was drawn against Aidan Brocklehurst of Mind Goblins, who has played me before. One of the most bonkers games I ever had of 9th edition was Aidan beating me with his Sisters of Battle after I alpha struck him incredibly aggressively with Harlequins, and he managed to pull that out with almost no units. So I knew Aidan was a very talented player and also a really lovely guy to play, so I was looking forward to this game. Aidan is running the Black Templars Ironstorm. Now, this is just tons and tons of guns. So you've got Gladiators, Gladiator Reapers, you've got Predator, you've got Rhinos with Crusaders in just for throwing chaff out onto the points to make you come and fight them. There's a fun combination with Eliminators and Impulsor that involves Eliminators jumping out, shooting, jumping back in the Impulsor, shooting again. So just a lot of output. No artillery, which helps me a little bit, but an awful lot of output. And the mission was priority targets. Now, priority targets, in my experience, when you have two players of equal skill, the player on second turn has an enormous advantage. In this case, I got first turn, which I did not want, because you get 5 points at the end of the game for every objective you're holding. And we've got a Dawn of War, a sort of hammer and anvil deployment with 3 objectives in the middle. So realistically, if we both play KG, whichever one of us just pushes at the end is going to be massively up on primary compared to the other one. That, in this case, means I unfortunately have to be proactive. I can't just sit and wait. I do have to make things happen. And unfortunately, Aidan's list is very shooty. So getting stuck into it is difficult. Whether I could have been patient for a turn or two here, I think is interesting to think about. Whether it was worth just letting him get more resources into the game, just using things like the Scourge to just whittle him down for a while first, because he wouldn't be able to reach and counterattack. And I do think there's maybe... And I maybe played this with a slight impatience and committed a few things forward and lost a few things cheaply. I was able to keep Aidan's primary down for most of the game, right? I put him on 5s for pretty much the entire first few rounds. And Aidan retaliated with brutal shooting and just cleared whatever I sent, because that's what the Ironstorm does, right? So anything in the Ironstorm's headlights got killed. I pulled a few cute plays with ingresses and objective stealing and Lilith's Witches bouncing about on a point and various different things to just keep my score in it. We both scored fine on the secondaries. I don't think my cards were great in the first couple of turns, but neither were Aidan's, and then Aidan's came good at the end, and by then I was running out of stuff to take advantage. Things like the Gladiator Reaper were huge in this game because the Overwatch from that just deletes any Drukhari infantry unit that steps into its line. And I'd made a couple of mistakes in the early exchanges where I got 2 Scourge squads and the Ravager out to shoot at a Rhino. The hope being I was blocking one flank with the Beast Pack. I didn't want the Rhino just being able to yeet Crusaders onto that and take it back because I wanted to hold the primary. And unfortunately what happened was that one Scourge squad just one-shot the Rhino, which meant that the other Scourge squad just had to sit there with the trousers down, waiting to be killed. And the Ravager itself was also committed for not much reason. Now, Aidan and I talked about it. If I undercommit, he pops smoke, and it's even harder to kill the Rhino. But actually, given the win conditions of the game, I think I needed to be saving the Dark Lances for shooting at tanks, right? The Black Templars tanks do die if you get Dark Lances into them. And as much as I was fixated on stopping the Crusaders and whittling away his chaff, and sort of trying to carve out primary for myself, I think actually I just had to be a little bit more patient. I just had to keep the Ravager, keep the Scourge, and wait for the tanks that really mattered, the most dangerous ones, to start coming forwards. And as long as those things were alive, Aidan was also going to be more reluctant to push forwards. But as it is, I lost one of the important Scourge squads too early. And then that made it much harder with my remaining assets for me to whittle down the units that he had. I also lost the 10 Incubi cheaply, pushing them up too aggressively. I think on the board that we had, it was just there just wasn't a good mid-board staging to be had with the kind of guns and reach that Aidan had. So I needed to just be very patient with that, hold it back and say, well, if you are coming to the middle, then I'll deploy this. So I think because I was on first turn and because I was very conscious of the end game state, I probably made a couple of errors, pushed a little bit too aggressively, didn't quite use everything as much as I would have liked to. Aiden, by contrast, literally sat back for 2 turns, really, committing very minimal assets, using his guns, clearing me in a very sort of patient and measured manner, not letting any of my really dangerous stuff connect with anything of his that mattered, and then rolled forwards for the end game win. So I think all credit to Aiden. He played that extremely well. I think it's another one where I'd be interested to play it when I'm on the second turn, because I assume that's hard in a whole bunch of different ways because he's pushing his Rhinos and Crusaders up. But at the same time, I can be a little bit more measured on the tempo. So a really good game, and that meant that Aiden took the sort of the first place win, which was awesome. And then I was able to scrap for the third place podium place, and I was jumped by a Necron player who scored really well in his last game and was able to jump me over me to second place. So, as far as post-event analysis goes, I was very pleased with this because I never thought in this particular crowd I was a sort of shoe-in to win the event, but I felt a podium was very possible, and I felt like in terms of the matchups, it went well. I think I muscled through a couple of matchups that aren't easy for Drukhari. I muscled through a couple of players that aren't easy for Drukhari either. And getting a podium with the Sky Splinter and sort of continuing that consistency felt really good. So it kind of does feel like a detachment where I can be achieving good things at a sort of local level, and then at a more national level, I think the more balanced and slightly underpowered relative to some of the top armies nature of the detachment starts to tell, and you kind of drop off a little bit. But I felt my own play levels were quite consistent. I was definitely using the tools very consistently. I think I've got a good sense of when to go and when to hold in the missions now, which is a big deal. But what is always the case with Drukhari is that very small mistakes can prove fatal in big games, right? So the pain taken mismanagement against Thousand Suns, that could have been really, really bad. The misuse of Scourge and the Ravager in the Black Templars game was really, really costly for me in various different ways. And so I think it's a case that this is still a detachment that requires you to think very carefully about when you commit things, have a very keen eye on what needs to die in your enemy's army before you commit key assets. What kinds of things do you need to be doing outside of just mission? Because I'm very guilty of focusing purely on score, thinking about I'm going to go and be here, do this, do that, and then losing sight of the casualties in the game. I think with Drukhari in general, because I like to play them in a way that I get loads of points, but I also get killed. If you get that balance just wrong, and just give them a bit too much too early in pursuit of points, and then you run out of puff to actually contest and play the game in the late stages, that's really bad. I was very, very close to finding myself in that situation against Thousand Suns, and I obviously did in the final against Ironstorm. I think I was also close against the Tower. There were a few where I really rode my luck in terms of how much I committed. And I think that kind of brings me back again to this question of, is 20 Incubi too many Incubi? Because one of the issues with the 20 Incubi is that if you aren't able to push and project into combat, if you've got an opponent that's shooting you very hard at a distance, and they're respecting the threat range, what I tend to find is that the Incubi struggle to get in the game, especially if they've got chaff and rubbish to keep in front of you. So that's drawing me towards maybe a second squad of Cabalites, just because I'm really enjoying the ability to hop out of a Venom, shoot some good special weapons, jump back in. And they, coupled with the Scourge, means that you've got 10 Dark Lances and some Haywire and blasters and additional guns that are not being given away in the first couple of turns. You can jump out, jump back into safety, and into a bunch of armies that don't have artillery still being a big problem for us. That means you've got a nice consistent base of shooting for the early rounds that you're not losing. And that, I think, is something I'd like to try, and will probably try next. I think I'm going to be running that at my next event, just to see where the balance is. And long term, I am also interested in the Court of the Archon and the potential of a Court of the Archon sort of combat and shooting unit, as has been used, I know, elsewhere by Paulie Wallace of Real Space Raiders. So I'm very curious to experiment with that as well. So I'm just starting to hit that point where this core has been great, but I'd like to dabble in a few of the other sort of flex options. And as the meta changes, obviously one of the big changes being the arrival of Orcs, I need to think about, do I have enough anti-infantry fire in the list? What's a good balance to get sort of more splinter fire and splinter weaponry in as well? Is the sort of general shift in the meta going to produce the need for a couple of different units? And we'll see. It'll be interesting to see. And I will hopefully be able to cover that all for you soon in my next big run out at an event. So, thank you very, very much for watching. We appreciate it here at 6 Plus. It means the absolute world to us. That's the end of part 4. I am going to Hellstorm All Stars this very weekend, taking a slightly different version of the list I've been running. So, part 5 will hopefully be out once I'm back and I'm able to sort of process and make sense of that afterwards. Please do check out more of our content on the 6 YouTube. There's a ton of Drukhari stuff on there, but there's also all sorts of other factions, a bunch of great shows by a bunch of sort of keen specialists and generalists who are really interested in 40k and playing it the right way. Please do consider becoming a YouTube member to support us to get early access to our content as that comes out. But there's also other possibilities if you're interested in coaching or mentoring as well. And do hit like and subscribe, leave us a comment. Again, it all helps us to thrive and continue making the kinds of content that we want to see. Finally, get in that Discord. We've got a big 6 Discord. There's a ton of Drukhari players in there these days, nattering away. A lot of them have come here via this video, so please do consider getting involved. Come and join the chat, and let me know what you're doing. I'm very interested to know what other kinds of units are working out there. I was having some good conversations with someone about grotesques in the Discord the other day, just continuing to puzzle out this wonderful detachment that we've got. That's all from me, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.